It's coming up to 13 minutes to 7 o'clock. Welcome back. You're watching the Workers' Day edition of Morning News today on eNCA with me, Dan Moyana. Now, over 1 million people are employed as domestic workers in South Africa. They perform essential work such as cooking, cleaning and caring for children. But domestic workers remain a vulnerable occupational group. As we celebrate and mark Workers' Day today, in the studio we're joined by a researcher of this sector, Kelebogile Khonou, from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, as well as a domestic worker herself, Maggie Mthombeni, but she also represents a workers' alliance. I think it's called EZU, right? Welcome, Maggie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just let's start with you, Maggie. It is Workers' Day. From a domestic workers' perspective, how do you mark such a day? How do you celebrate or commemorate, or whatever word you choose, Workers' Day?
It's to us, like domestic workers, we don't think we are celebrating a Workers' Day because we're just called domestic workers while we are not treated like other workers, SA.
So you don't get a sense of celebration on this day because you remain being treated unfairly?
Yes, that's why we just watch some other workers celebrating Workers' Day. To us, it's just a day.
Just another day?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not really happy to hear, but we'll delve into that a little bit more. In terms of research that you've been busy with, the sentiment she's expressing, is that what you're finding?
That's exactly what we're finding. So we find that one of the main issues in the domestic work sector is that domestic workers are not seen as real workers. Their work is not seen as valuable by society, and as such, all the laws that have been put into effect after 1994, the laws that cover other workers, like the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, Labour Relations Act, and Sectoral Determination 7, which is made to protect domestic workers, are not felt on the ground by domestic workers.
Now, Kelebogile, what are the reasons you're finding out through the research that why is it that domestic workers are not afforded or given the same respect as workers in other sectors?
I think one of the main reasons is that this type of work is seen as work that women should do without compensation. It's work that has been done historically by women without compensation. One of the other reasons is that the place of work for domestic workers is the home, which is not seen as a place of work. And as such, these perceptions of domestic work as undervalued, as something that's not actual work, has permeated throughout society.
Now, Maggie, I'm hearing this. That means you are not being respected. Mm-hmm. What other challenges do you, as domestic workers, actually face in the work environment?
Oh, I can say that the whole day. Because, like, behind those doors, it's harassment, everything. Even, like, being a domestic worker, you're going to be called like a domestic worker, but you don't have a contract. You're going even to be asking your increase every time. If you're supposed to have an increase, you have to beg for increase. You have to beg for the pay slip while you are working, and then while they're calling yourself a worker while you don't have a pay slip. You have to beg for your pay slip. You have to beg for your contract. You have to beg to be registered under UIF. Everything which you want supposed to be given. You are begging for everything as domestic workers.
What about wages and salaries? That also becomes a big debate every time, especially now with the minimum wage in place in the country.
Like even like this 15 rand for minimum wage is not a living wage.
Well, we understand. I mean, I think trade unions like COSATU, yesterday I spoke to Sizwe Pamela of COSATU. They have a rally today in Durban, and he said they know it is not a living wage. They want to get to a living wage. Currently, it was just a minimum wage to set a kind of a bottom thing, but you are not happy with it.
But it can't be, because like most of those organizations in South Africa, they're all educating domestic workers, but they're not educating employers as well. Because the main thing, they have to educate employers to tell them what they have to do on domestic workers, like all these things, to treat us as workers as well. So they're only educating us as domestic workers, but they can't educate those who are employing us.
So you think employers of domestic workers are ignorant?
Yes.
Of some of the key issues. Do you think that deliberate, or just people, as Kelebogile was saying, what you are finding out, people think, if this is work from home, a woman must just do the work and the other stuff doesn't matter.
So if we're like that, why they call us workers? They have to cancel that word workers and say domestic helpers.
So you want to be treated with full rights of domestic workers. Now, a lot has been changing, Kelebogile, in terms of attempts to improve the scenario. But what Maggie is saying, it looks like domestic, I'll call them domestic employers, and many of us in the middle class, we employ domestic workers. We really don't know how to navigate and deal with this sector.
Yes. So this is one of the issues in the sector, is that you have all of these laws that are put in place to protect domestic workers. However, the employers of domestic workers themselves do not understand these laws. They don't know that the laws that cover them, for example, all the laws that cover you, cover domestic workers. However, things like what Maggie is explaining, most domestic workers don't have employment contracts. They're not receiving pay slips. They're not registered for UIF. And until October of last year, domestic workers were not they're currently not included in the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act, which the Department of Labour is actually working towards including them in the near future.
Okay. Now, I need to. The next question is in the context of 25 years of democracy,
sure,
which we've just celebrated on the 27th of April, and next week it's elections on the 8th of May. So in that context, Maggie, I just want to give you a last word to say, when you look back and with these issues that you are facing, as in the domestic workers sector, how would you want to see these things take go? How would you want this change happen going forward? What is it that you want to see different?
Especially, you have to be treated like some other workers. You have to have those, like some other workers that are having like a contract, pay slip, registered under UIF. Everything as a worker you have to, as domestic workers.
So full rights must be implemented.
Yes.
Yeah? That's really what you want.
Yes, and the minimum wages, even if it's not a living wages, but as long as all domestic workers we do have a one wage minimum wages.
Yeah. Kelebogile, do you think as a country, understanding the research that you're having and knowing the challenges that the country is facing and listening to Maggie's plea there to be treated fully, do you think as a country we can do that? Do you think we've got the capacity or the willingness, or the will to do it rather?
Definitely. I think we have the capacity to do it. The question is about willingness. So the willingness needs to come from the Department of Labour in terms of enforcing compliance, and the willingness needs to come from employers of domestic workers to educate themselves, to actually take initiative to find out what laws they're obligated to meet for their domestic workers, for their domestic employees. I think we should use that word from now.
Domestic employees. Thank you very much. That's Researcher Kelebogile Khonou from the Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, as well as a domestic worker, Maggie Mthombeni. She's also from the eZwi Domestic Workers